In the span of a single night, how does a living city become a sealed time capsule, and why did so many people stay until it was too late? This is the story of Pompeii, a Roman town of shops, temples, and crowded streets, where families ate dinner, slaves finished their work, and travelers paid for rooms unaware that the mountain above them was counting down. When Vesuvius erupted in AD 79, it didn't burn Pompeii with rivers of lava. Instead, it smothered it with falling pumice, collapsing roofs, choking air, and then at the end waves of scorching ash and gas that moved faster than anyone could run. Thousands died across the region, and the exact number may never be known, but the dead left behind a rare kind of evidence: the shape of ordinary life, frozen at the moment it broke. Tonight, we'll follow the disaster through the critical hours, what happened, why it unfolded the way it did, and what Pompeii still teaches us nearly 2,000 years later. Pompeii did not feel like a city waiting to die. It felt like a city recovering. 17 years earlier, in AD 62, a major earthquake shook the Bay of Naples, damaging buildings, cracking walls, and forcing long repairs. Even by 79, construction still echoed through some streets. Scaffolding, fresh plaster, and half-finished rooms. People lived with that memory the way humans often live with risk. They adapt. Small tremors became part of the background. Repairs became routine. And the mountain, green, wide, and seemingly calm, was just part of the view, a familiar presence above vineyards and villas. They had no modern volcanology, no seismographs, no alert system. To most, Vesuvius was not a threat. It was landscape. Pompeii itself was a place built for movement and trade. Its streets carried carts and footsteps toward the Forum, the political heart of town. Water ran through fountains and public baths. Bakers fed ovens. Fish sauce makers bottled their sharp, salty product for export. In courtyards, families cooked and argued and prayed. In taverns, men drank, gossiped, and rolled dice. Wealth sat beside poverty. Grand houses with painted walls stood near cramped rooms where laborers slept. And like many Roman towns, Pompeii's society was layered: free citizens, freedmen building new lives, enslaved people powering households and businesses. The city had a pulse, and the day of the eruption began as if that pulse would keep going. So what changed? A plume. Sometime in late summer or autumn of AD 79, the exact calendar date has been debated for centuries, the top of Vesuvius ruptured and sent a towering column of ash, pumice, and gas into the sky. For a long time, a traditional date of August 24th circulated from manuscript copies of Pliny the Younger's letters. But archaeologists have pointed to multiple clues suggesting a later season, including a charcoal inscription indicating a date in mid-October, along with other autumnal signs found at the site. What matters for our story is not the day on a modern calendar, but the reality on the ground. The eruption began, and a normal morning became a crisis measured in minutes. We know about the beginning because someone watched it from across the bay and later wrote it down. Pliny the Younger, a Roman administrator, described seeing an enormous cloud rising like a pine tree-tall trunk, spreading crown and image so vivid it still shapes how we picture explosive eruptions. He was at Misenum, not in Pompeii, but his account is our closest eyewitness description of the plume and the panic along the coast. His uncle, Pliny the Elder, commanded the Roman fleet nearby and sailed out toward the disaster, part rescue mission, part scientific curiosity. That decision would kill him. In Pompeii, the first deadly problem wasn't fire. It was weight. Ash and pumice began to fall, first lighter, then heavier, accumulating hour after hour. Stratigraphic studies of the deposits show that Pompeii endured a long phase of pumice fall before the final surges arrived, with the eruption's early stage lasting many hours. Imagine what that means at street level: visibility shrinking, air turning gritty, every breath tasting like stone dust. Roof tiles clatter, then crack. Wooden beams groan. Courtyards fill like bathtubs with pale, floating rock. Outside, people look up, trying to understand what they are seeing. Is this a storm? A god's warning? A local fire on the mountain? And then the unnatural detail: the sound. A continuous roar, like the earth tearing. At first, some people likely ran toward the gates, toward the sea, away from the ash. But here is the question that keeps returning: why didn't everyone flee immediately? The answer is messy and painfully human. Some residents may have believed the worst would pass. Others were elderly, sick, or responsible for children. many would have been reluctant to abandon property. Homes, savings, tools, animals, and the kind of wealth that cannot be carried in a sack. And for enslaved people, the choice may not have existed at all. Even if you wanted to escape, where would you go? Roads could be crowded, ash could make walking slow, falling stones could wound or kill. The sea, too, was dangerous, with waves disturbed and boats overloaded. Disasters don't just threaten bodies, they trap decisions. As the pumice built up, Pompeii's architecture became a hazard. A Roman roof is not designed to hold endless falling rock. As accumulation increased, buildings began to fail, and those collapses created a cruel dilemma. Stay inside and risk being crushed, or go outside and risk being struck by falling debris and choking air. Archaeological evidence suggests many victims were found inside buildings, which fits a scenario where people sought shelter, hoping roofs would protect them until they didn't. In a modern disaster, we ask, why didn't they evacuate? But in that moment, the information people had was incomplete, and every option looked dangerous. And then the eruption shifted from heavy fall to something far worse. The column above Vesuvius did not simply rise and disappear. Eventually, it became unstable. Parts of it collapsed, and when a volcanic column collapses, it can generate pyroclastic density currents, fast-moving surges of ash, gas, and fragments that flow outward like ground-hugging storms. Some of these currents devastated Herculaneum first, closer to the volcano, where people sheltering near the waterfront died in catastrophic heat. Studies of Herculaneum's victims have emphasized how quickly lethal conditions could arrive when these surges hit. Pompeii, farther away, was spared those earliest waves, at least at first, and the delay may have sealed the fate of those who stayed. It gave a false sense that the city might survive. Think about the psychology of "not yet." The ash is terrible, but you're still alive. The buildings are damaged, but some are standing. You hear distant rumbling, but the city hasn't been erased. That thin thread of normality can keep people in place. You tell yourself, one more hour, one more decision, one more attempt to protect what you own. Meanwhile, the mountain keeps rewriting the rules. Now let's narrow into the title's promise. Pompeii in 8 hours, the stretch of time when the city's options collapse. Not the full lifespan of the eruption, which likely unfolded over roughly a day, but the period when the situation in Pompeii turns from survivable to lethal. As pumice continues to fall, streets become uneven and unstable. Doorways clog. The city's familiar routes distort. Ash turns daylight into a gray dusk. When people try to move, they must step through drifts that rise toward the knee and then higher. Every breath becomes labor, especially for children and the elderly. And the air itself, filled with fine particles, can inflame lungs and trigger panic. In disasters, panic isn't irrational. It's a body reacting to suffocation. Somewhere in the long night, Pliny the Elder reached the far side of the bay. According to his nephew, he tried to calm people, to offer reassurance, to interpret what was happening. But the air grew poisonous, and he collapsed and died, likely from a combination of toxic gases and respiratory failure, possibly worsened by asthma or another condition. His death matters not just as a famous casualty, but as proof of how far the eruption's effects extended. This wasn't a local inconvenience. It was a regional catastrophe unfolding in real time. Then came morning, or something like it. Because the sky over Pompeii did not brighten as it should. Ash and cloud filtered the light into an eerie dimness. At this point, the eruption entered its final and most lethal chapter for Pompeii. Major pyroclastic surges reached the city. These were not slow lava flows you could walk away from. They were fast, hot, and violent. Stratigraphic research reconstructs surges powerful enough to engulf Pompeii, depositing thick layers and killing those who remained. The mechanism of death, based on modern studies and the condition of remains, was not being buried alive in a slow sense, but rapid asphyxiation and heat shock as the surges flooded streets and buildings. Some studies have described how quickly lethal conditions could take effect once the surge arrived, on the order of minutes. Picture the moment a surge enters the city. It is not a wall of flame you see from far away. It is more like a storm front, a rolling darkness that moves with speed and pressure, pushing ash into every gap. Doors, windows, courtyards, none of them seal against it. The surge carries heat, but also a crushing density of fine material that lungs cannot handle. If you are outside, you are overwhelmed. If you are inside, the ash can invade and suffocate you anyway. And if you are deep under fallen beams, you may avoid the highest heat for seconds or minutes, but you are still trapped in air that cannot sustain life. This is the brutal answer to the question, how could an entire city be frozen? Not by magic, and not by instant petrification, but by the physics of volcanic disaster, a long rain of pumice that breaks structures and delays escape, followed by surges that erase the final pockets of survival. In that sequence, Pompeii becomes both a grave and an archive. And what about those who did escape? Many did. The evidence inside Pompeii suggests that a significant portion of the population fled before the final surges, which is why the number of bodies found while haunting is not equal to the city's full population. Yet across the wider region, the eruption's death toll was higher. Estimates vary, and certainty is impossible, but sources commonly cite thousands dead across multiple towns and villas around the bay. The tragedy is not that everyone died, but that so many died while others, sometimes neighbors, sometimes family, managed to leave. Survival, in disasters, is often uneven, shaped by timing, mobility, luck, and social position. After the surges, Pompeii lay buried under meters of volcanic material. The city was not simply abandoned, it was sealed. Over time, memory blurred. People returned to the area, scavenged where they could, and moved on. The Roman world continued, but Pompeii, its rooms, its street corners, its graffiti fell into silence. That silence lasted for centuries. When Pompeii re-entered human attention, it did so through digging through hands and tools cutting into hardened deposits. Excavation is often described like discovery, but it is also destruction. Every layer removed is a layer you can never put back. Early excavators did not always prioritize careful documentation. Yet even imperfect excavation revealed an astonishing truth. Pompeii had preserved not just monuments, but ordinary life: kitchens with pots, shops with counters, wall paintings with bright color, and marks of daily routine scratched into plaster. One of the most famous and emotionally direct techniques came later: plaster casts of victims. When bodies decomposed inside compacted ash, they sometimes left cavities, negative spaces in the hardened material. By injecting plaster into those voids, excavators could recover the shape of a person at the instant of death: a curled posture, a raised arm, a face turned as if still trying to breathe. These casts are not photographs, and they cannot tell us every detail of what someone felt. But they show something rare in ancient history: individual human forms, not just names carved in stone. Yet Pompeii's story isn't only about death. It's also about what the city reveals about the living and how that understanding keeps changing. Excavations continue, and so do surprises. In recent years, major work in areas like Regio 9 has uncovered remarkably preserved spaces that reshape our picture of social life in Pompeii, including an elaborate private bath complex in a wealthy home, evidence of how Roman elites used luxury not just for comfort but for status, politics, and performance. These finds are not minor details. They remind us that Pompeii was not a museum piece Roman city. It was dynamic, unequal, and alive, with people competing to impress, to rise, to secure alliances right up until the ash arrived. Even more unsettling is the idea that Pompeii did not become an instant empty void after 79. New research and reporting has highlighted evidence suggesting some level of post-eruption activity, signs that survivors or newcomers may have returned to parts of the ruins, living in difficult conditions among broken walls, scavenging materials, and reshaping spaces for basic survival. If true in the ways the evidence suggests, that changes the emotional arc. It means Pompeii was not only a city that died, it was also a landscape of aftermath, where people tried to live beside loss. That is a different kind of tragedy: slower, quieter, and deeply human. And then there is the science hiding inside the ruins: frozen work sites, tools left mid-task, repairs interrupted. Just weeks ago, researchers reported a discovery in Pompeii that offered unusually direct evidence about Roman concrete making, including a construction site preserved by the eruption and clues about techniques such as hot mixing. Why does that matter? Because Pompeii is not only a window into Roman art and daily routine, it is a laboratory for how an ancient world built itself. A disaster that erased one city ended up preserving knowledge that can influence ours. So what is Pompeii, really? It's tempting to call it a warning, a lesson about nature's power and human blindness. But warnings are easy to ignore until they are personal. Pompeii is more precise than that. It shows how risk becomes normal. How people keep working after earthquakes. How cities rebuild with the assumption that tomorrow will arrive. How social inequality shapes who can leave quickly and who cannot. And how the most catastrophic moments often arrive after a long period of not yet, when the mind is tired and the body is committed to staying put. It also forces us to confront how we tell stories about the dead. When we look at plaster casts, we feel we are close to individuals. But we must be careful. The cast is a shape, not a voice. Pompeii cannot give us every name, every relationship, every reason someone stayed. What it can give us is something rarer than certainty. Evidence. A city laid out like a map of choices, some that saved lives, some that did not. And when we follow the chain of events, the long pumice fall, the collapsing roofs, the delayed decision-making, the final surges, we see that the 8 hours were not just a countdown on a clock. They were a narrowing corridor of possibility. Why does this still grip us, 2,000 years later? Because Pompeii collapses the distance between ancient and modern. You can stand in a doorway and recognize the shape of a home. You can see a street corner and imagine the noise. You can read a wall and feel the urge behind it, to be remembered, to joke, to complain, to boast. The disaster did not erase humanity. It preserved it, sometimes beautifully, sometimes brutally. And Vesuvius still stands there today. Not as a character in a morality tale, but as a real volcano in a real region filled with real people. The story of 79 is not simply that nature is strong. It's that human life organizes itself around danger until danger interrupts the pattern. Pompeii reminds us that civilization is not only made of marble and law and art. It is also made of timing, infrastructure, trust, and the fragile assumption that we will have time to decide later. If you made it to the end of this film, take a second to tell me what you think Pompeii's ruins reveal most clearly. The power of the eruption, or the choices people made before it was too late. And if you want more documentaries like this grounded in real evidence, told with a clock ticking, please like the video, subscribe, and comment one question you'd like answered next. If you could witness one moment from Pompeii's final day, would you choose the first falling ash, the desperate attempt to flee, or the silent aftermath, and why?